Welcome back to Business Mastery for Startups, Scale-Ups, and Early Stage Businesses with your host, Jerry Gadori. That's me. And this week we have Anuj Adhiva at Boston Startup Week. We're recording live here this week at the Suffolk Law School, and I am super excited about it. We did this last year. We're doing it again this year. So Anuj, you've got a ton of experience in sales and revenue generation and scaling businesses. You've been active in this community for, a decade now, I believe. You're one of the old men of the ecosystem. Tell us more about yourself and how you wound up in Beantown teaching people how to grow startups.
Sure. So this is a completely accidental career for me.
Me too.
I have degrees in chemistry and biochemistry, and I'm a terrible scientist, or at least so I thought. I happened to click on a tweet by Sean Ellis, who's the guy who coined the phrase growth hacking, on September 3rd, 2013. Of the thousands of tweets I could have seen, that's the one I clicked on. Mm-hmm. And he was launching this site called Growth Hackers, which was just a place for him to nerd out about growth. And he just coined growth hacking. So everybody was like, what's this growth hacking thing, right? And it turned out it was this community. And this was at the start of my journey of trying to understand, do I want to be a founder? I don't know anything because, again, chemistry, biochemistry, right? And gotten onto the community. Cut to a year later, I'm the most active member on the site. Cut to another year later, I get an offer to come join his team. And so my first job in growth was with the guy who coined the phrase growth hacking to run the community. Wow. I was the most active member of. And at the time, they were also launching a SaaS product for growth people. So I became the data analyst on the team as well. And, that was 4 years of, building something that was a passion project into a full-blown revenue-generating business, over 4 years. And all of those lessons were surprisingly lessons I had already learned because, as it turns out, all this fancy growth hacking is nothing but applying the scientific method to product and marketing. And I'm like, hang on, this is familiar, right? And true to form, the first experiment I ran at Growth Hackers was using the format of my lab notebook from high school. Right? Aim, hypothesis, materials, method, observations, results, conclusions, next steps. So I'm like, hang on. So we all know how to do this stuff, right? It was chemicals in a lab, now it's pixels in a screen.
Yes. I've got to interrupt you for a second and share something. So in the last episode, the one recorded just prior here live, we had Tripp, who works with Venture Cafe, and she has a very eclectic background. And we were talking about how diversity of thought and coming from areas outside the startup community can be so helpful. My oldest son went to school for aerospace and now runs Amazon's robotics lab. He builds the optic systems. He had no interest once he actually got into it in aerospace. But he said, Dad, he graduated from WPI local school. He said, Dad, what I actually learned at WPI wasn't super helpful, but learning the engineering mindset was life-changing.
Absolutely. And then this is kind of what Sean said as well. Is like, I would hire somebody with a science background any day over a traditional marketer because you come with two things. One is an experimental mindset, which is exactly what you need to grow anything. And the second is a more systems thinking approach rather than I'm going to lob a campaign over the wall every week sort of approach, right? Because you want to see the context within which anything happens and what the first, second order effects of that are.
Yes.
Right? So when you put those two skills together, right, I too was surprised at how applicable and not only applicable, how non-negotiable that skill and that mindset was to growing startups.
I couldn't agree more. And, speaking of that, it really makes me think when I hear companies talk about scaling, when I listen to founders talk about scaling, there seems to be this, I don't want to say mystical, but this overly, what's the word I'm seeking here? This non-scientific mindset, this acting as though it's art rather than science. And I see these companies grow, and I see some of them not putting the infrastructure in place to support that growth and know that inevitably is going to come back down because of that. I've got to imagine as it relates to scaling a company, your background is especially helpful.
Oh, 100%, right? And as I discovered, this is essentially math. Right, and which follows.
Get off my show.
I failed math in the 7th grade. This has become, I think, almost my number one question for founders when I meet them is, tell me your plan to hit whatever revenue number, or you want to raise a Series A, right? Tell me your plan for a Series A. And it's always surprising to me how wishy-washy that answer is, or how much that depends on some mythical virality that will happen, right? Or some influencer mention that might happen, right? And all of those things are good, but those are tiny ripples in a raging river, right? And what is almost always missing is this fundamental understanding of the math of growth,
Yes.
right? And because if you don't understand what all goes into, and certainly what goes out of trying to scale a business, it becomes very hard to understand where the choke point in your growth is, right? And so let me give you a very simple example, right? Think of a simple marketing funnel, right? You have 100 website visitors, of which 50 sign up, of which 30 trial out your product, and of which 20 pay, right? And of which
Pretty darn good numbers right there.
Right, but right there, if I was to say, okay, now let's say those 100 visitors leading up to 20 paying customers is what makes me $1,000, a month. Now, what needs to happen? What is my greatest lever to making 1,000 into 10,000? And what hasn't normally been done is that analysis of that math to say, hey, my biggest upstream drop off is from that 100 to 50. I lose half my people. So what can I do about changing that 50 to maybe 75? And now what's the knock-on effect of that versus just saying, I need to do more marketing? Maybe you don't need to do more marketing. Maybe you just need to do conversion rate optimization. Maybe you need a better first experience in your product. It could be anything, but without having done that math of how do the numbers flow through my product, it becomes hard to understand where that biggest leverage opportunity is. And if you don't understand that, it becomes very hard for the entire company to focus on that, right? Because this is the number one thing that trips up a lot of companies and founders is we will do everything, or we will do things that are not meaningful to actually moving the number. And there almost always is this one choke point, which if you don't solve, it doesn't matter what else is going to happen, right? And so I have almost over-indexed on this exercise being the first thing we do if I'm working with any team, is let me understand how the numbers flow through your system so I can understand your greatest either problem or opportunity, which then allows me to focus you, the CEO, or you, the co-founders, on the biggest problem, reorient your resources to the right problem, right? And communicate this as nothing else matters in the company. We're doing triage now, right? The way to solve that specific problem or to take advantage of that opportunity is to experiment. And so that's what gives you experimental focus. That's what gives you company focus, which then allows you to see, hey, is our understanding of that choke point correct or not? Right? Because either the numbers will move in a positive direction or they won't. And if they don't, maybe your understanding was incorrect. Or in some cases, okay, it might have seemed like the biggest problem, but it really isn't. Right? But without that very systematic scientific approach of zooming out, looking at the entire picture, zooming in on the biggest problem area or opportunity, doing a bunch of very focused and high tempo learning around how do we solve for this, and then zooming back out to see did we actually solve it, right? Which is a process that never ends. Because even if you solve this, something else.
Yes.
It's like a leak is going to spring somewhere or the other, right? You're always trying to plug the biggest leak.
Yes, the hallmarks of success in startups is that the problems get bigger, not smaller.
Correct.
But you said enough there, we could unpack that for 2 hours. But there's two pieces of it I want to touch on. The first one, you mentioned about potential virality and stuff. I want to take a second to talk about that. It's beautiful when that happens. Everybody loves the story of Oprah picking up some author's book, mentioning it on a show, and they become a bestseller. That's wonderful. But it's not replicable. So it's great if it happens, but it's nothing. You might as well buy scratch tickets. Second thing you said that I really want to talk about, I love everything that you said about looking at the entirety of the funnel and determining where the choke point is. But, and I just want to highlight it, you mentioned it quickly, kind of walked away. It's critical, and this is just engineering mindset, you change one thing at a time.
Correct.
Because what I see, a mistake I see often made is using your example of 100, 50, 20. People say, well, 150, 20, I'll double the 100, or I'll 10x the 100 to 1,000 and see if it becomes 500, 200, and they make a bunch of changes, and they either do or don't get the result, but they don't know what button created that change.
Correct.
But when you change one thing at a time, you know that worked or didn't work. Next thing, change that worked or didn't work. Next thing.
Correct. And a highly underappreciated aspect of this is actually being able to construct good hypotheses.
Yes.
Right? Because most hypotheses are extremely broad and vague. So even if you feel like you're following the process, your approach is kind of nebulous. And there's a lot of, I think the technical term somebody once used with me is there's a lot of execution risk baked into proving or disproving a hypothesis out, right? And you take that away, firstly, by understanding what that binary outcome will be and what that binary outcome will be a function of, which then allows you to very specifically prep for that change and to then measure for that specific change only. Because I have also fallen into the trap of not only having vague hypotheses, but then having these results where for anybody who's ever played with data, it's a rabbit hole. It will go as deep as you want it to go. And there is just massive diminishing returns on data analysis. Because of course, a part of the trap is that a CEO will always ask, but what about this and what about that, right? And if you haven't done this work, right, understanding the math of your growth, you will not understand where to stop your analysis, and you will also not be able to not get stressed out when the CEO asks you about what about this, because you can say that doesn't matter. We're just focused on this, and that's why we're just measuring this.
Yes, a little bit of a tangent, but one I feel relevant. So I work more on the people side of the business, though my background, ironically, is in sales just as much. But I work more on the people side of the business. And you say something there that I think that consultants need to hear and understand. When you do any type of an organization-changing level event, if you don't have buy-in from the C-suite, you're not going to succeed. There's no universe where you can go into an organization, not have the support of the C-suite, not have them sold first, and make foundational level changes to the organization and not have the CEO drag you out back and beat you up in the parking lot.
And not even, I would extend that and say it's not just consultants, even full-time, experienced this and failed at exactly what you just said.
Oh, that's where I know.
As a full-time person, because I came in thinking, I'm going to do this fancy growth stuff, right? And now here was a Series B hyper-growth company, right, that already had a machine that was working, right? And I'm coming in and saying, yeah, we're going to do this. They're like, little boy, you're going to sit in the corner and do whatever.
Yeah. Why don't you shut up?
You're right. And I failed spectacularly at that role for exactly this reason is I couldn't do that mindset change and make them understand why what I was proposing was so critical for the future of the org.
Yes, and let me take it one step further. You need to have the support of the chain between you and that CEO as well. I'll give you a specific example. In a former life, I was a principal consultant at a company that did sales training to technology services companies. And myself and the founder would go into an organization. They varied pretty wildly from about 5 to 50 million generally, though we'd worked with some publicly traded companies as well. But we'd go into an organization, we would do an assessment, see where their organization was based on industry metrics. We'd share those findings with the CEO, and we'd make recommendations of where they can improve things. And often we get brought in to, train the sales team and the managers on a particular methodology and to get them to make changes. And what we found was if we didn't have the buy-in of the sales manager, when the salespeople would go through the training, they'd be all excited because they're not on the phones working. All salespeople love training for that reason. But they hate training when it comes to changing their workflow.
Correct.
So what would happen is they'd be excited for the week or so of the classroom portion. Then when we'd follow them back to the sales floor and watch them and make corrections and stuff, we'd catch them breaking off to the sales manager. And if the sales manager wasn't bought in, he or she would say something to the effect of, hey, give it X months, they'll be gone. We'll go back to doing things the way we did. And that company will have spent significant, usually, 6 figures for one of our extended packages like that and get no result or no meaningful result.
I've seen situations where, especially I think ones where I have succeeded the most is when it has been literally everybody, like you said, from the founder or co-founder down to the next VP level, down to the next director level, right? And doing the work to make them understand first, because I think part of the mistake sometimes, and I've made this as well, is I don't have the time. So I'm going to get everybody in through the door at the same time and give them the same message. And that's completely the wrong thing to do, whether it's as a consultant, as a full-time hire, or even certainly as a marketer marketing externally. I mean, I should have known that as somebody who's done this for a while, that, hey, different audiences need different messages.
Yes.
Right? And didn't take my own advice, right? And tried to give everybody the same message. I mean, of course, the people at the lower end kind of got it, right? But again, there was no incentive for them to go and stay with it, because even though it made sense, the way they were being rewarded had absolutely nothing to do with this new way of operating. And new didn't even mean more work. In some cases, it was less work. It was more efficient work, right? But
It was
like you
different.
said, along with that organizational cultural shift, there is this shift in terms of how the company rewards and recognizes this new way of operating. And if that doesn't accompany the cultural shift, I think the odds of success are like zero.
Yeah, my two big takeaways from what you just said are proper incentivization. I see it often in businesses where the compensation plan and the treatment of employees is incentivizing a behavior that doesn't lead them to where they need to be. I can think of 1,000 examples for brevity. I'll skip. I think pretty clear. The second thing, though, you mentioned is something I actually learned. Oh my gosh, I hate being a person with stories. This old almost 30 years ago. I was a very young technology services salesperson. I was working with a supply chain software company, and I was talking to the CEO, and he explained the concept of linked goals, which to my late 20s self was brand new. I know it's probably not to anybody now, but to me it was back then. And he talked about the importance of understanding that linked goals, as he defined it, was when people in an organization are overall rewarded for a specific outcome, but their reward and their journey through that outcome aren't the same. So while their goals are linked, they're not necessarily in lockstep. And understanding those subtle differences and altering your message accordingly is whether or not you succeed at getting them all on board and rowing in the same direction, or whether your ship's going in circles.
Totally. And so I'd like to connect that back to where we started with the math of growth, right? Because ultimately, yes,
Brought up math 2 times, the third time we're done.
When I ask founders, what is a measure of value delivered? Right? Almost everybody will tell me, oh, it's money, it's revenue, it's profit, right? And for almost all cases, that answer is wrong, right? And the reason it's wrong is because you make money as a function of providing value.
I was just thinking
Right?
that.
And so money is actually a lagging indicator of value. What every business needs is a leading indicator of value. And over the last few years, the idea of this overarching metric called a North Star metric, which is one number that quantifies value delivered, at least on a per product basis, if you're a multi-product company, allows that level of linked goals to happen, because now you can say that if as a company, this number measures how we deliver value, how do we as a sales organization or a marketing organization or an engineering organization, how do we measure our contribution to value delivered, which is that bigger number, through our goals and metrics? And this is, I think, a fundamental disconnect, is because what still happens today is marketers are rewarded on MQLs. Salespeople are rewarded on closed won. Engineering is on bugs fixed. Or customer success managers are on tickets closed. And I'm not saying those are not important. What I'm saying is we need to think a little bit deeper and say, what if you were to compensate a marketing person not only on an MQL, but an MQL that...
Yes.
What if you rewarded a salesperson not on a closed one, but on a closed one that renewed, or a CSM that closed, a ticket that led to a successful referral, or a bug that was in the way of value delivery and made active users go up, which is what made monthly subscriptions go up. If we take it that one next step further, that allows for true linking of goals, because all of that is in the service of growing value delivered.
I love that, and I've never heard it described that way, so thank you. Can you give a more concrete, a specific example of what that leading edge indicator might be?
Sure. So let me give you a simple example. Let's say Uber. The way Uber delivers value is by giving you a ride, right? So you get value when you have taken an Uber ride, correct?
Yes.
Now, but we are not the only people involved in Uber. There are drivers, right? And for drivers to get value out of Uber, they need to make money, right? So that means they have to provide rides, correct? And how does Uber make money? They make a cut,
Yes.
right? So the first, I think, almost characteristic of this leading indicator is that it's a win-win number for everybody, right? So number of rides taken is their leading metric, is their North Star metric. Because if we get value by taking a ride, drivers make money by providing the rides, Uber makes money as a function of rides taken, right?
That's a great example.
Correct? So it's the most simple example.
Yes.
Right? And so literally everything Uber does is in the service of making number of rides taken go up. Now, I'm not saying that is the only number they look at. They would segment that number out in 10,000 different ways, right? By city, by neighborhood, by time of day, right? Even by type of person, right? Whatever it is, by where rides originate, how long rides are, right? And they would look at that through second and third order layers to understand, just as we were talking about with the 150-20 number, that same principle being applied to say, okay, where in the ways that we segment this data is the biggest choke point? And let's solve for that, because if we do, then in Boston we make number of rides go up because we solve for X, whether it's driver availability, right? Or it's how quickly we can provide the ride, or something else, right? And they would do this across cities, right? So that you can apply this to pretty much any business, and it doesn't matter what size business you are, right? So you can even say, the business size of Google, right? How does Google make money today, right? They still, despite everything, over 90% of their revenue comes from ad revenue.
Yes, they're essentially an advertising company.
Correct.
Yes.
Right? So now, how do we get value out of Google today? By doing searches, correct? Who else is involved in searches? It's these people providing ads. I've never clicked on an ad in my life, but clearly people are, because Google is a $1 trillion company, right? So it's the ad providers clearly get value by people clicking on ads and buying the things they sell, right? And of course, Google makes money as a consequence, right? So almost everything Google does is in the service of making the number of searches go up. Because if you did not find value in search results or in answers nowadays that it provides, you would not continue to use Google. And if you didn't continue to use Google, number of searches would go down. If the number of searches went down, the number of advertisers would go down, the amount of money Google made would go down. So whether Google makes Nests, Pixel phones, Gemini, Veo, you pick whatever it's doing, current business model is still making money through ads and through searches that these ads are served up in. Right? So still, everything they do is in the service of making number of searches go up. It may not, how we search may be changing, but it is still in the service of making number of searches go up. So I think it doesn't matter what size business you are. There will always be a way to measure value delivered. And you have the right one when you can see the win across the board for every person involved in that ecosystem. Right?
Exactly. That's awesome. Anuj, I would love to talk about this for another hour. Clearly, I have to have you back on the show because we could break down every component of what you said for another additional hour. In the short term, before we can have that happen, if people want to learn more about you, how can they find you?
Best place is LinkedIn. I'm Anuj Adhiya on LinkedIn. If there are others, they don't matter. I'm the only one that matters. I'm the best one.
The best Anuj. So awesome. So first of all, thank you very much for being on. Again, folks, if you've seen the show before, you know that that link will be in the show notes, so you can catch it there. But thanks very much for being on. You've been an amazing guest.
This was a lot of fun. Thanks for the nerd out.
All right. Thanks, Anuj.